The night the lanterns failed across the northern ridge, something else seemed to flicker awake. Something older than any of the townspeople, something that had been waiting beneath the soil and stone far longer than anyone realized. The valley was known for its sudden mists and long winters, but that night the cold came with a strange heaviness, like the air was being held still by an unseen hand. For the small settlement huddled between the river and the logging trail, the evening began like any other, dogs barking at shadows, chimneys spitting sparks, and the wind slipping between the cabins with its usual restless whistle. But by midnight, every living soul felt it. They could not name it, they could not describe it. They only felt instinctively that something was wrong. It started with the sound, low, trembling, almost like a moan carried across the treetops. At first, the few who heard it assumed it was the storm rolling in. The clouds were stacked thick and black, shivering with distant lightning. But the sound didn't match the sky. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It wasn't any animal they knew. It was deeper, heavier, as if the earth itself were groaning. Old Mrs. Halcombe, who lived at the far end of the ridge, was the first to mention it. She had stepped onto her porch to collect the laundry. She'd forgotten and froze when the sound rolled over the valley again. Her lantern dimmed to a faint ember, barely holding on against the darkness. She whispered to no one, "Not again, not tonight," before retreating inside and bolting her door. She refused to speak of it afterward, but those who had known her longest noticed. She crossed herself 3 times before blowing out her candle. In the center of the settlement, young Andrew Miller jolted awake in his bed. His dreams had been filled with movement, wet, dragging movement. When he opened his eyes, the room was freezing. Frost coated the windows inside glass, and his breath puffed in pale clouds. The fire he had banked before bed was dead cold, not even glowing. That was strange in itself, but stranger still was the fact that, even half asleep, Andrew could hear something moving in the distance. Something rhythmic. Something too slow to be a deer, too heavy to be a wolf. He pressed his ear to the wall. The sound grew clearer. A scraping, a pull, a pause, another scraping. Like something enormous crawling across the forest floor. Andrew dressed quickly, the cold gnawing at his fingers. He tried to wake his father, but the man was already in a deep, unnatural sleep, mouth half open, eyes twitching beneath the lids. Andrew shook him harder, but instead of waking, his father only mumbled a single word: down. Andrew didn't know what it meant. Across the river, the logging camp was still lit. Lanterns glowed between the tree stumps and stacks of timber, casting long, trembling shadows. 4 loggers had the night shift, responsible for watching the equipment and keeping the generator from freezing. At least, that was the plan. When Lucas Berriman made his rounds, he found the western lamp smashed. The iron pole was bent outward, as if something had struck it from inside the light circle, not from outside it. He crouched down to collect the shards, and that's when he saw the tracks. They weren't animal prints. They weren't boot prints. They weren't anything he recognized. They were long, smooth impressions, as if something had been dragged. But the center of each impression was perfectly rounded, and the edges were sharp, like a blade had traced the shape into the soil. They extended past the tree line, straight toward the blackest part of the woods where the moonlight could not reach. Lucas backed away slowly. He didn't call for the others. He didn't want to make noise. But when he returned to the main camp, he found the other 3 loggers standing perfectly still around the generator, all facing the same direction, toward the forest. None of them turned when he approached. None blinked. Their breath puffed in slow, synchronized clouds, and the longer Lucas stared, the more he realized their chests weren't rising and falling. They were not breathing at all. Lucas staggered back with a gasp, finally shouting their names. That broke whatever held them. All 3 collapsed at once, hitting the frozen ground with lifeless thuds. Their eyes opened at the same time, wide and stark with terror, but they didn't speak. They simply pointed toward the woods. Their fingers shook violently. Lucas followed their gaze. The forest was silent, dark, unmoving. Then the sound came again. The groaning, the dragging closer. Lucas had heard many things in the forest: snapping trees, wolves tearing through underbrush, even the distant howl of bears. But this sound was different. It wasn't moving around obstacles. It wasn't weaving between trees. It was moving in a straight line, as if the forest parted for it. He shouted for the men to get up, get inside, get anywhere but here. Only one listened. The other two stared, entranced, mouths hanging open, as if awaiting a command only they could hear. Lucas grabbed the nearest axe, and backed toward the tool shed, pulling the listening logger with him. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, closer. The tree line bent forward as if a giant hand pressed it down. Lucas didn't stay to see what caused it. He slammed the shed door shut and barred it with a heavy timber. His hands shook uncontrollably. The man he saved fell to his knees, whispering broken words. "It's awake, it's awake, it's awake." Lucas put his ear to the wood. Silence. Then, just on the other side of the door, a slow, deliberate scrape. Not a knock, not a strike. A scrape, as if a fingertip the size of a shovel blade gently traced the door's surface. Lucas stumbled backward, his pulse pounding. The lantern hanging on the wall flickered wildly before dying, plunging them into thick darkness. Across the settlement, more lanterns blinked out, one by one, until the entire valley drowned in black. The sound rose again, sweeping across the ridge in a long, trembling wave. Everything that walked or crawled or breathed felt it pass through them like a sickness. Doors slammed, horses screamed. Children woke up sobbing with no memory of what frightened them. And from the depths of the forest, where the night was darkest and the air too cold to inhale, something began to rise. Something that had been underground for centuries. Something that remembered the valley long before people ever settled there. Something that had waited. The settlement did not know it yet, but this night, this exact night, was only the beginning. What had awakened would not return to sleep. Not until it reclaimed what had once been its own. By the time the sun began to lift over the eastern ridge, a thick gray fog had settled in the valley, curling around cabins and barns like silent smoke. The lanterns were still dark. The morning promised no light for those who relied on them. People emerged cautiously, squinting into the mist, uneasy about what had passed through the night. Horses pawed at frozen ground, whinnying in confusion. Dogs growled low and uneasy. Even the wind seemed hesitant, moving only in soft whispers rather than its usual restless rush. Andrew Miller was first out of his house. He felt the chill wrap around him like a shroud, and carried the fear from the night into the daylight. His father had vanished, gone without explanation, and the loggers had not returned. The tracks in the forest were still there, stretching in impossible lines that twisted and disappeared among the trees. Andrew studied them, pressing his fingers into the frozen soil. Something enormous had passed through, something alive, something intelligent. He heard a sound, a faint rustle beyond the tree line. His heart raced. He swallowed hard and stepped forward. Each footfall sank slightly into the frost, but he could not stop himself. The pull was irresistible. As he entered the trees, the fog thickened, wrapping around his chest like icy fingers. Branches scraped against his coat, twigs snapped underfoot, and still, the rhythm of the drag grew closer, steady, unyielding. Lucas Berriman followed shortly after, carrying a crude weapon he'd fashioned from an axe head tied to a log. He wasn't sure what he expected to find in the fog, only that he could not ignore it. He called Andrew's name, his voice trembling, but the mist swallowed it instantly. He pressed on, half hoping the boy had vanished into nothing, half hoping he hadn't. Then they saw it, a shadow shifting at the edge of the clearing. Not human, not animal, something else entirely. Its outline was massive, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent in ways that made Lucas's stomach twist. The fog clung to it like smoke, obscuring details, yet every movement seemed deliberate, precise, terrifying in its certainty. "Stay back," Lucas whispered, more to himself than to Andrew. But Andrew had already stepped forward, entranced, unable to pull his gaze away. The shadow moved slowly toward them, dragging something unseen. The sound of scraping filled the air, rising and falling rhythmically like a heartbeat. Suddenly, a scream cut through the valley, not human, not animal, but something in between. Andrew jumped back. The shadow halted, its silhouette still in the fog. A long, low growl followed, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The smell hit them then. A mix of damp earth and decay, the scent of something that had lain buried far too long. Lucas swung the makeshift weapon, but the shadow recoiled effortlessly, like the strike had been a gust of wind. Then, with deliberate slowness, it disappeared into the fog. Silence returned. Only the wind whispered, hesitant again, almost as if it feared drawing attention. Both men stared at the spot where the figure had been. The forest seemed impossibly still. Even the fog hung motionless. The world felt suspended, fragile, waiting. They did not speak for a long time, each trying to rationalize what they had just seen. Did you see that?" Andrew finally whispered. His voice shook. Lucas nodded, though he wanted to shake his head and pretend none of it had happened.
"Yeah."
"And I don't want to see it again." Neither of them noticed the subtle movement in the underbrush behind them. The slight ripple, the faint scrape as something followed, something that had been observing them since the edge of the clearing. Its presence was almost imperceptible, but both men felt it in their bones. Back in the settlement, the townspeople were beginning to gather, their fear from the night mutating into confusion and suspicion. Windows were opened, faces pressed to frames, people muttering to each other, comparing experiences. Everyone had noticed it. Everyone had felt it. Some thought it was wolves, some thought the storm had finally come early, but those who had ventured into the forest spoke in hushed, fearful tones. Old Mrs. Halcombe refused to speak, remaining behind locked doors with heavy curtains drawn. She had seen this before, long ago, when she was a child in a neighboring town. Her grandmother had called it the rising of the old ones. But no one believed her. No one would. Not until it was too late. The town council attempted to organize a search. Lanterns were lit, and small groups formed, determined to find the source of the disturbance. But the fog made everything disorienting. Trails doubled back on themselves. Trees seemed to move when not watched directly. Even the well-marked logging paths twisted unnaturally. Those who wandered too far found themselves emerging near where they had started, as if the valley itself had shifted overnight. By mid-morning, several men reported that animals had vanished. Horses were missing from their stalls. Dogs had not returned. A few chickens and livestock were found torn and shredded, far from their pens, yet strangely, without a trace of blood. It was as though they had been lifted from the earth itself. Andrew and Lucas, despite their fear, could not help but continue tracking the impressions in the soil. They led deeper into the forest, moving almost instinctively. It was as though the forest was guiding them, or the creature wanted to be found. Every so often, the dragging sound resumed, faint at first, then loud, echoing off tree trunks. Then they found the first body. It was small, a fox or a dog perhaps, but closer inspection revealed human hands, fingers broken, bent at impossible angles. The creature had not eaten it, it had only dragged it. The realization sent a chill through both men. This was not random. This was intentional, deliberate, careful. Lucas gripped Andrew's shoulder. "We need to get out, now." Andrew shook his head. "No, we need to know what it is. If it's hunting, if it's dangerous, someone has to figure it out. Someone has to stop it." And then they heard it again, the low, wet scraping, moving closer, circling the trees. It had learned they were there. It knew. They ran. Branches whipped their faces. The fog seemed to close around them, slowing them, twisting the forest into a labyrinth. The scraping followed, never fast, never frantic, just steady. The sound was inescapable. Lucas tripped over a root and fell hard, his weapon sliding from his hand. Andrew pulled him up. Their breaths came in ragged bursts. Somewhere ahead, the mist parted slightly, revealing a clearing. They pushed toward it, hearts hammering, hoping for something. Sunlight, open space, anything. The clearing held a single sight that froze them both. The ground was covered in impressions like the ones they had seen the night before, deep enough to bury a man. And in the center, something enormous crouched, or rested. They could not tell. It was only a silhouette, dark against the fog, but its shape was terrifyingly familiar, almost humanoid, yet wrong in every way. Then it shifted, slowly, deliberately, its limbs bent at angles that should not exist, its head tilted toward them, and the low, wet scraping became a guttural hum, vibrating through the clearing like a warning. Andrew and Lucas knew instinctively that the forest itself had stopped. Birds held their positions in midair, deer froze mid-step, even the wind had stilled. The creature exhaled a low hiss, and the frost beneath it quivered. Neither man dared move. The creature moved again, just a fraction, and with that, the forest exhaled, letting the sound of reality return, letting the men know they were still alive, still conscious, but the warning was clear. It was patient, it was intelligent, and it was hungry, not for flesh, but for acknowledgement. Andrew swallowed hard. We need to warn everyone. Lucas shook his head, too afraid to speak. We barely made it out of the fog alive. If we try to move, it will know. From the edges of the clearing, unseen, the dragging resumed. Slower now, farther back, as if the creature were retreating into the shadows. It would return, and when it did, it would remember these faces. It would remember the living. Andrew and Lucas backed away slowly, keeping their eyes fixed on the shifting silhouette. The fog began to move again, curling around their feet, hiding the creature's tracks, erasing any evidence of its presence. By the time they emerged into the settlement proper, the sun had risen enough to begin burning off the mist. No one believed them. Not truly. They told their story, but the townspeople dismissed it as fear and exhaustion, as imagination. Still, a few nodded quietly, remembering the strange sounds in the night. The unease would linger for weeks, even months, and the valley would not rest again, not for a long time, because the thing in the forest, whatever it was, had marked its territory, and it would not be patient forever. The town's uneasy calm lasted only a day. By the following night, whispers of missing livestock and strange shadows had begun to circulate. People locked their doors early, bolted windows, and refused to travel alone. Mothers clutched their children close, afraid to let them breathe freely in the darkness. Dogs whined and paced, and cats disappeared entirely, leaving the houses strangely silent. Andrew Miller and Lucas Berriman remained on edge. They could not stop thinking about the clearing, about the enormous silhouette, the unnatural posture, and the wet scraping sound. Neither slept that night. Every rustle, every snapping twig outside their homes made them jump. The forest, it seemed, was breathing, alive, patient, waiting. By morning they convened in Andrew's small kitchen, the air thick with the smell of soot and frost. Both men had resolved something in the night. The creature could not be ignored. "We need proof," Andrew said, his hands shaking as he gripped a worn notebook. "We need something that shows the town this isn't imagination." Lucas, rubbing his bruised forearm from the fall in the forest, shook his head. "Proof? You think we'll live long enough to get proof? That thing, it knows. It's not like wolves or bears. It's smart. Too smart." Andrew pressed his lips together, frustration and fear warring in his chest. "I don't care. Someone has to see it. Someone has to understand. If we keep hiding, it'll just keep taking, keep watching, and we'll be blamed when people vanish." Lucas sighed, the lines of exhaustion deepening on his face. "Fine. But we do it carefully. We watch from a distance. We mark tracks. We don't engage it." By mid-morning, they had gathered ropes, lanterns, and a crude measuring tool, a straight plank of wood to gauge the depth of impressions in the frozen earth. The two men set out for the edge of the forest, moving cautiously, alert to every sound. The fog had lifted slightly, leaving behind an eerie clarity that made the shadows of the trees stretch long and unnatural across the frost, hardened ground. It did not take long to find the first set of fresh impressions. Large, humanoid, yet impossible in proportion. The prints sank deep into the frozen ground, almost as though the creature weighed more than any man could, but its gait was deliberate and precise. Andrew knelt beside them, pressing his gloved hand into the frost. The impressions were cold but firm, edges crisp. "These are real," he murmured. Lucas examined them closely. "Real enough to kill you if it decides you're in its way." He motioned to the marks that led deeper into the forest. "Look." They moved toward the creek. "Something's waiting there." The creek was a narrow strip of water that ran like a silver snake through the forest. Ice lined its edges, and frost glistened on every branch. As they approached, the air grew heavier. The wind, once a playful companion, now seemed to press against them, warning them back. Then they saw it. Not the full silhouette, not yet, only a shadow on the opposite bank. Its limbs moved with unnerving fluidity, bending impossibly, and it watched them. Andrew's stomach knotted. The creature's head tilted slightly, as if considering them, analyzing, deciding whether they were worth the effort. Andrew raised his notebook, trying to steady his shaking hands. He scribbled observations quickly: size, posture, dragging pattern, and the absence of blood around previous victims. Lucas hissed under his breath. "We need to leave. Now." Before Andrew could respond, the creature stepped from the shadows. Its size was staggering, taller than any man, limbs unnaturally long, with shoulders hunched like an apex predator preparing to strike. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glimmered with a cold, reflective intelligence. The scraping sound returned, low and wet, emanating from its chest or throat. It did not move aggressively at first. Instead, it circled the creek slowly, testing their reactions. Every muscle in Andrew's body tensed. He wanted to run, to scream, but his legs felt rooted to the frozen earth. Suddenly, it lunged, fast, impossibly fast, not at them, but at the water. The creek erupted into spray as something enormous and heavy hit it, sending ice shards flying. Andrew and Lucas staggered backward, shielding their faces. The creature emerged with a small form in its grasp. A deer, ripped from the ice-bound creek, still alive but terrified. Lucas staggered back, horror-struck. It doesn't just kill. Idiot toys with them. The creature held the deer aloft, then dropped it lightly onto the bank. It did not eat. It seemed amused, or curious, or testing them. It had learned their fear, and it was intelligent enough to manipulate it. Andrew shook violently. It's thinking. It's thinking. This isn't instinct, this is planning." The creature shifted its head toward them. Andrew could feel its gaze as if it were physical, weighing down on his very soul. It advanced a few steps, then stopped, circling the creek again. Its breathing, or whatever vibration it produced, caused the frost to shake beneath their feet. "We need to get evidence," Andrew said, his voice trembling but determined. "Pictures, drawings, something we can show the council. If this thing exists, it's not going to stop." Lucas swallowed hard. "Or it's going to kill us trying." They retreated carefully, making notes, measuring prints, and marking a trail. The creature followed, always at a distance, circling, observing, ensuring they did not stray too far from the creek. It was methodical, calculating, patient. Back in the settlement, their reports were met with disbelief. Councilmen shook their heads, citing rational explanations: wolves, storms, or imagination. Andrew and Lucas presented their sketches, their measurements, even the displaced ice along the creek, but no one believed them. Then the first human disappearance occurred. Samuel Hayes, a young logger, did not return from the forest. His companions reported hearing strange sounds: dragging, low growls, and unnatural snapping of branches. Days later, only his coat was found near the creek, frozen stiff, torn at the seams. No footprints led away from the scene, no blood, nothing to indicate struggle, just absence. Fear gripped the town. Families kept their children indoors. Farmers refused to tend the northern fields. The forest became a place of whispers and dread, a presence that extended beyond the trees themselves. Andrew and Lucas knew they had to act. They could not simply observe. They began planning. Maps were drawn. Watch points were established. Every night, one of them would patrol the edges of the forest, attempting to predict where the creature would strike next. They called it, reluctantly, the shadow of the creek, though neither fully understood its origins or purpose. One night, during a full moon, the creature approached the settlement itself. Not with violence, not yet, but moving along the tree line, watching. Its presence was felt rather than seen, an oppressive weight on every chest. Lights flickered in the windows. Lanterns swayed as if an invisible hand had brushed against them. Animals cowered. People whispered, but the shadow remained just out of reach, intangible, omnipresent. Andrew realized then that the creature was not simply a hunter. It was a guardian of something, territory, perhaps, or memory or vengeance. Its intelligence, patience, and calculated restraint indicated a purpose beyond mere predation. Lucas, witnessing it for the first time without Andrew at his side, felt the full weight of helplessness. "We are not its equals," he whispered. "We are just prey it has not decided to eat yet." Andrew knew he was right, and yet he could not give up. Because while the shadow of the creek remained, the town remained at risk. The unknown waited, patient and silent, watching for mistakes. And somewhere, in the hidden folds of the fog, the creature learned, adapted, and waited for the perfect moment to act again. The town had descended into a quiet panic. Days bled into nights with little distinction. Farmers abandoned their fields. Blacksmiths refused to leave their shops. Children stayed inside, pressed against windows, staring out into the fog, bound forest as though the shadow itself might appear at any moment. Andrew and Lucas moved through the streets like men carrying a secret plague, speaking in low tones, eyes darting to every tree line, every darkened doorway. No one wanted to hear them anymore. They had shown the prints, the damaged trees, even the small, shredded animal corpses that appeared along the creek. But townsfolk laughed nervously, dismissed it as imagination or superstition. "It's winter," one man said. "Wolves get hungry. That's all." But Andrew knew better. Wolves left tracks. Wolves left blood. Wolves did not move with such cunning. Wolves did not seem to understand fear itself. One evening, as the sun sank behind the skeletal trees, the air held a sharp bite. Andrew and Lucas huddled in the barn, the scent of hay mixing with the acrid chill of smoke from the hearth. They had spent the afternoon checking traps and marking the perimeters around the settlement, but the sense of dread had only grown. "I can't sleep," Lucas said, staring out through a crack in the wood. "Every time I close my eyes, I see it, standing there in the fog, just waiting." Andrew nodded grimly. "I know, I feel it too. It's like it's inside my head sometimes, watching, calculating." He traced the tracks they had measured earlier with his gloved fingers. Each impression was deep, deliberate. Sometimes it moved across the creek, sometimes it circled back on its own trail, erasing its path, like it knew they were following. "It's not just an animal. It's intelligent, patient. It's learning us." Lucas's eyes widened. "Then it'll strike when we least expect it. And we'll never see it coming." They fell into silence, listening to the wind through the barn slats, the low groan of the old building settling. Somewhere in the distance, an animal shrieked, a long, unnatural sound that made them both flinch. It was nothing human, nothing like any sound they had heard before. Night deepened. The temperature dropped sharply, frosting the windows with delicate lace patterns. Andrew tried to write in his notebook, to document their observations, but the words felt inadequate. How could any writing capture what they had seen, what they feared? How could anyone believe them when even they struggled to understand it themselves? Around midnight, a sound like heavy breathing reached the barn. Andrew froze, hand tightening on the notebook. Lucas stiffened, holding a lantern, its light trembling. The shadow fell across the door first, and then, slowly, impossibly, it entered. The creature moved silently, its massive limbs bending in ways that no human or animal should be able to bend. Its eyes, or the reflective orbs that passed for eyes, caught the lantern's glow, sending shards of light across the hay-strewn floor. It did not attack. Not yet. It tilted its head as if observing, assessing. Andrew swallowed hard, knowing that any sudden movement could provoke it. "Stay calm," he whispered. Don't do anything." The creature lingered, pacing slowly around the barn's interior, its long fingers brushing against the wooden beams. It paused beside the corner where a sack of oats rested, then drew back, almost as if disappointed in its own curiosity. Its presence was overwhelming. Every breath they drew felt like it had been stolen from them, every heartbeat amplified in the silence. Then, just as abruptly as it had entered, the creature left. No sound, no trace, just the faint rustle of frozen hay as it disappeared into the night. Lucas exhaled slowly. "I thought it would kill us." Andrew shook his head. "It's not about killing. It's about control. It's testing us, seeing how we react, seeing if we're predictable. The following morning, the town awoke to another sign of the shadow's presence. The northern fields had been ravaged. Corn stalks bent, the ground churned, as if by massive claws, and several head of livestock were missing. Farmers gathered at the edge of the forest, muttering, fearful eyes scanning the tree line. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed they had seen a giant figure moving through the mist, taller than a man, bending and twisting in impossible ways. Others swore it could speak in human tones, that they had heard their own names whispered on the wind. By noon, the council convened. But there was little agreement on action. Andrew and Lucas presented their notes, the tracks, the measurements, even sketches of the creature, but the town's council dismissed them. "This is nonsense," one elder said. "The boys' imaginations run wild. No creature could be so." His voice faltered. So clever. The dismissal only hardened Andrew's resolve. They could not rely on others. They would have to confront this directly, gather irrefutable evidence, or the creature would continue its silent reign, taking what it pleased. That night, they organized a watch. A small group of men, armed with lanterns, ropes, and crude weapons, positioned themselves at the edge of the forest. Andrew and Lucas took the lead, knowing the creature might appear again. The wind carried the scent of frost and decay, the quiet crunch of snow underfoot echoing through the stillness. Hours passed with nothing. Andrew's eyes burned from straining in the dim light. Lucas's hands ached from gripping the rope they planned to use as a trip line. Just as they began to doubt, a movement caught Andrew's eye, a shadow among shadows, gliding across the forest floor. "It's here," he whispered. The creature appeared at the tree line, larger than ever, its head low, scanning, observing. It moved with deliberate slowness, every step a calculated measure. Then it stopped, tilting its head, its gaze fixed on Andrew and Lucas, and something unearthly passed through the air. A sound not fully sound, like a vibration that set their bones on edge. Andrew's heart raced. "Set the trap," he hissed. They positioned the ropes along a narrow section of path, tying them to trees and laying a crude snare. The creature approached cautiously, circling the trap. It paused, then lunged, but stopped just short, tilting its head again. It was as if it understood the setup, as if it could reason, plan, anticipate. Then, in a sudden blur of motion, it vanished into the fog, leaving the ropes untouched, the trap useless. Andrew sank to his knees, frustration and fear crashing together. "It's too smart, too damn smart." Lucas stared after the mist. "And patient. It's not in a hurry. It'll wait, it'll watch, and it'll come back." That night, sleep eluded them both. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, every distant howl felt like a harbinger. They knew they were being stalked, studied. The shadow of the creek had become more than a threat. It had become a presence, a force in the town's life, an unseen hand that could strike at will. The following days brought new horrors. A child disappeared from her home, gone before anyone had realized she was missing. Dogs fled the forest, only to be found days later torn apart, and the air grew heavier with the smell of damp earth and something else, something primal, metallic, and impossible to place. Andrew and Lucas realized something chilling. The creature was not hunting randomly. It was sending a message. Each disappearance, each terrifying encounter, was a statement, a way to show the town that it was in control, that nothing human could match it. They had no choice. They could no longer watch from the edges, take notes, or hope someone would believe them. They had to follow, to confront, and if possible survive. And somewhere in the cold, foggy expanse of the forest, the shadow of the creek waited, patient and eternal, aware of every movement, every heartbeat, every flicker of fear. The morning after the child's disappearance, the town had begun to fray at the edges. Panic rippled through families, whispered through kitchens and taverns, muttered in prayerful tones at the church. Windows were shuttered, doors barred, and parents clutched their children so tightly they could hardly breathe. The forest seemed to lean closer, its skeletal branches reaching like fingers into the yards and streets, as if mocking the town's fear. Andrew and Lucas convened at the edge of the woods before sunrise, the chill biting their faces and turning every breath into fog. Lucas carried his rifle, unsteady but determined, while Andrew hefted a lantern and his notebook. Notes scrawled in near, illegible handwriting from sleepless nights. "We can't wait anymore," Andrew said quietly, scanning the mist. "We need to go in. We need to see it, understand it, and if possible stop it." Lucas nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "I've tried to warn people, tried to show the tracks, the broken fences, the livestock. Nobody listens. If we don't do something, it's going to keep taking more." They moved in silence, stepping cautiously over the frozen underbrush, the muffled crunch of their boots masked by the wind. Every shadow seemed to twist into a shape, every tree a potential hiding place for the creature. They had marked the areas it favored, the paths it used, the zones it seemed to patrol, and now, armed with nothing but fear and determination, they followed those tracks into the heart of the forest. Hours passed. The fog thickened, settling like a damp blanket over the earth. Branches scraped against their shoulders, and every rustle of leaves made them jump. Then, suddenly, the forest fell silent. The wind ceased, the distant cries of animals vanished, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "It's close," Andrew whispered. A shadow shifted ahead. Not a tree, not a bush, but a presence. The creature emerged from the mist, taller than any man, its limbs impossibly long and flexible, its head tilted, surveying them, and the faint glint of its eyes reflected the lantern light. It did not move aggressively. Instead, it seemed to watch, calculating. Andrew swallowed, his throat dry. "We can't just charge it. We need a plan." Lucas shook his head. "Plan? There is no plan. It's something else. Something that doesn't care about our rules." The creature advanced slowly, soundless, its fingers brushing against tree trunks with deliberate precision. Then it stopped, leaning slightly forward as if acknowledging their presence. A low vibration emanated from its body, an almost inaudible hum that made the hairs on their necks rise. Andrew raised his notebook instinctively, as if documenting it could somehow make it real, tangible, controllable. "We need to draw it out. Lead it somewhere. Away from the town." Lucas nodded reluctantly. "Then we need bait. Something it wants." Their eyes met, and the unspoken understanding passed between them. It would not be enough to simply follow. They needed to manipulate the creature, to predict it, to force it into an encounter on their terms. By midday, they had devised a risky plan. Lucas would act as bait, luring the creature along a pre-planned path while Andrew followed with nets, ropes, and whatever crude weapons they had. It was dangerous, reckless, and almost certainly doomed. But it was the only chance they had. As twilight approached, they moved into position. Lucas crouched behind a fallen log, rustling branches to attract attention, while Andrew watched from the shadows, ready to act. The creature appeared almost immediately, emerging from the fog with unnerving grace. It moved toward Lucas, its gaze fixed, aware of every sound and motion. Lucas held his breath, heart hammering. Come on, come on." The creature stopped short of the log, tilting its head. It seemed confused, or perhaps amused by the bait. It reached forward, long fingers brushing the earth, and then, suddenly, it lunged. Lucas bolted. The creature followed, impossibly fast, moving with the silent swiftness of a predator that knew no fear. Andrew followed, struggling to keep pace, lungs burning, mind racing. The path they had chosen was narrow, lined with trees that would serve as both obstacles and trouble. Andrew and Lucas moved with deliberate caution, every step measured, every sound catalogued. They were no longer merely hunters or trackers. They had become students of fear, parsing the shadow's methods as if it were a textbook. By sunrise, the air was heavy with mist, clinging to branches and obscuring the faint trails that they had carefully mapped. The shadow of the creek was nowhere in sight, yet its presence was palpable, a silent reminder of the intelligence they faced. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, made them pause and calculate. Was it observing them, testing their patience, learning? Lucas adjusted his pack, eyes scanning the horizon. "It's smarter than we thought," he said quietly. "It's not just strong or fast. It's learning from us, Every trap we set, every maneuver we make, it adapts. Andrew nodded, his gaze tracing a faint pattern of footprints along the muddy path. Exactly. And that's why we have to be 2 steps ahead. We can't just react. We have to anticipate, manipulate its behavior, otherwise, we're nothing more than prey waiting for the inevitable. They moved toward a clearing that had become the epicenter of the creature's activity. It was here that the shadow had left its first markings, where livestock had vanished in the dead of night, and where townspeople had reported seeing its glowing eyes reflecting in the moonlight. The ground was scarred, churned by enormous limbs and clawed feet, the smell of damp earth and something metallic lingering in the air. Andrew knelt, brushing aside debris to examine a deep gouge in the soil. "It's directional," he murmured. "Every time it hunts here, it approaches from the north, passes the stream, then circles back to the edge of the forest. It's deliberate. There's a pattern, a strategy. We can use that." Lucas frowned. "And if it figures out we know the pattern, what then? It's not human. It doesn't think the way we do." "No," Andrew admitted, "but it learns from consequence. It reacts. It adapts. And it's predictable in its own way. We just have to exploit that." For the next 2 nights, they tested their theory. They set decoys, reinforced traps, and created false trails meant to mislead the creature. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated by distant howls and the occasional rustle of leaves. Each time the shadow appeared, it moved with uncanny precision, sniffing, testing, circling, almost as if it were reading their thoughts. Yet, every maneuver revealed subtle weaknesses: hesitation, overconfidence, patterns of repetition that they could manipulate. By the 3rd night, the moment of reckoning arrived. Andrew and Lucas had prepared a clearing near the creek, lined with hidden snares and nets reinforced with steel. They had baited the site with livestock as before, but this time, they had layered the traps, pits partially hidden with branches, tripwires attached to nets, and tensioned ropes designed to slow the creature rather than stop it entirely. They were not trying to kill it. They were trying to contain it long enough to study it, to understand it. The moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting a pale silver light across the clearing. Every sound was amplified: the crack of a twig, the whisper of wind through leaves. The shadow emerged, silent and deliberate, its elongated limbs carrying it with terrifying grace. Its glowing eyes scanned the clearing, pausing, calculating as if assessing every variable. Andrew's hands shook as he whispered, "Now." Lucas triggered the first snare. A net snapped upward, catching the shadow's clawed arm. The creature hissed, a sound that made the hair on their necks stand on end. It thrashed violently, clawing at the net, but the tensioned ropes slowed its movements, forcing it toward the hidden pit. The shadow's eyes gleamed with an almost human awareness, its head swiveling to study Andrew and Lucas. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if witnessing a standoff between 2 kinds of intelligence. One human, one something else entirely. The creature lunged, breaking free from one snare, only to stumble into the pit cleverly disguised with brush. It roared, a sound that echoed through the forest like rolling thunder. But even in the pit, it was not helpless. It adapted immediately, leveraging its immense strength to climb the sides, using claws and limbs with horrifying dexterity. Andrew swallowed hard. "It's learning too fast." Lucas nodded grimly. "It's testing us again. Every move we make, it observes, adjusts, exploits. We're pushing it, but it's pushing back harder." The struggle continued for hours, the forest around them alive with the sound of snapping branches, flailing limbs, and the low, resonant growls of the shadow. Both men were drenched in sweat, muscles trembling, hearts hammering. It became clear that this creature was not just a predator, it was a force of nature, intelligent, relentless, and far beyond anything they had imagined. And then, in a sudden, unexpected maneuver, the shadow did something neither Andrew nor Lucas anticipated. It leapt from the pit with terrifying agility, clearing the top and landing silently behind a tree, watching them. Its glowing eyes reflected not fury, but curiosity, an almost clinical assessment. Andrew realized in that moment that the shadow had been studying them as much as they had been studying it. Every trap, every bait, every calculation. They were all data, information to be processed and learned from. Lucas whispered, voice barely audible, "It's thinking. Like it knows we're planning something bigger, and it's considering it." Andrew nodded. "We've underestimated it. We can't just force it into a corner. We have to outthink it, anticipate its anticipation. This isn't brute force. It's chess." For the first time, the two men saw a strategy emerging rather than direct confrontation. They would use deception, misdirection, and timing. They would create scenarios that seemed advantageous to the shadow, only to manipulate the outcome on their terms. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the only way to survive, and perhaps, finally, to claim some measure of control over the terror that had haunted the forest for months. As dawn broke, the shadow disappeared once more into the mist, leaving behind only faint footprints and a few tufts of dark hair. Andrew and Lucas exhaled collectively, exhaustion and relief washing over them. They had survived another night, learned another lesson, and discovered the first tangible advantage against the creature. But both knew that this was only the beginning. The shadow of the creek was intelligent, adaptable, and relentless. Every night would be a battle of wits, patience, and courage, and somewhere deep in their hearts, they both understood a terrifying truth. This was no longer about survival alone. It was about understanding the creature, predicting it, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation that would determine the fate of both the forest and themselves. As they packed their equipment and traced the faint paths left by the shadow, Andrew whispered, "We've seen its mind now. We know it adapts, and we can adapt faster." Lucas nodded. "Then we keep going, one night at a time, one step ahead. We learn, we survive, and we fight smart. That's the only way." The forest seemed to watch, silent and patient, holding its secrets close. But Andrew and Lucas had glimpsed the edge of understanding, and with it came a fragile hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the shadow could be challenged, and perhaps, one day defeated. The nights had grown longer, colder, and heavier with tension. Andrew and Lucas moved cautiously, almost ritualistically, tracing the edges of the forest, while marking subtle signs of the shadow's activity. Every footprint, every snapped twig, every bent branch was evidence, a language they were slowly learning to interpret. But the creature was evolving as quickly as they were, its methods becoming increasingly unpredictable, its presence more oppressive. By the fourth week, they realized the shadow had begun targeting them directly. No longer merely observing, it was testing, probing, forcing mistakes. Livestock left in secure pens were found mutilated in ways that defied logic. Traps set meticulously were found neutralized or turned against them. The creature was learning not only from their actions, but from the environment itself, using the trees, the underbrush, even the streams as tools to its advantage. Lucas crouched behind a fallen log, peering into a clearing that had been a frequent hunting ground. "It's smarter than any animal I've ever seen," he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "It's not just strong. It's patient. It's calculating. It's thinking like a human, but faster, deadlier." Andrew, watching the shadowed edges of the trees, nodded grimly. "It's learning to anticipate our anticipation. Every trap we set, every strategy we plan, it watches, analyzes, adapts. We can't predict it the way we used to. We have to trick it into thinking we're predictable, then hit where it least expects." They moved carefully, deliberately, relying on misdirection. The plan for that night was audacious. Lure the creature into a valley near the creek, where they had created a labyrinth of false trails and hidden nets. The shadow had struck there before, drawn to the scent of fresh prey. Tonight, it would find something far more dangerous than livestock. It would encounter two men who were willing to risk everything for the chance to outsmart it. As darkness fell, the forest became a cathedral of sound and shadow. Owls called, leaves rustled, and every step the men took seemed amplified. Andrew laid down decoys, stray clothing, scattered tools, a fresh carcass, each positioned to suggest an easy, accessible target. Lucas double-checked the hidden snares and nets, ensuring that even if the shadow detected them, the real danger lay elsewhere. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then came the first sign, a low, resonant growl, vibrating through the air, causing both men to freeze in place. The shadow was approaching, moving with terrifying grace. Its glowing eyes pierced the darkness, scanning, calculating, testing. Every muscle in their bodies tensed, every nerve on edge. It circled the clearing, examining decoys with methodical patience. The growl grew louder, more insistent, as if expressing both curiosity and frustration, and then, without warning, it lunged. Not at a decoy, but at the traps designed to contain it. The snares snapped tight, ropes stretched and groaned, nets lifted and tangled. The shadow thrashed violently, its strength overwhelming, but the traps slowed it just enough to allow Andrew and Lucas to see its movements, to study its adaptations. Each time it reacted, it changed tactics, pulling limbs free, leaping to adjust, turning one trap into a countermeasure. It was learning in real time, each second teaching it something new. Andrew whispered urgently, "It's testing us. Every reaction we make, it absorbs. We can't just react. We have to force it into a false decision, make it commit to a path we've prepared." Lucas nodded, his fingers tightening around a rope. "We need to be unpredictable. Make it believe it's controlling the hunt, then strike when it's overextended." The shadow's movements became more aggressive, more cunning. It leaped from tree to tree, avoided pitfalls, and manipulated the terrain to its advantage. Every time it seemed trapped, it adapted instantly, using the environment as a weapon. The men realized with mounting dread that brute force would never subdue it. Only intellect, deception, and timing could give them a chance. Hours turned into a tense standoff. The shadow lunged at the decoy Andrew had positioned near a narrow gorge, expecting an easy kill. Instead, hidden nets sprung from both sides, snagging its limbs and slowing its momentum. It roared, a guttural, terrifying sound that echoed through the valley, shaking leaves and sending birds into frenzied flight. But it did not panic. It adapted. Using a combination of brute strength and instinct, it freed one arm, then the other, circling the trap with chilling intelligence. Andrew and Lucas held their positions, hearts hammering. They had learned one vital truth: the creature was not merely hunting, it was strategizing. Every reaction, every adjustment it made, revealed the level of its intelligence. It was calculating probabilities, testing outcomes, and learning from each failure. Then came a moment of terrifying clarity. The shadow paused, head cocked to one side, its glowing eyes fixed on the two men. For a brief instant, it seemed aware not only of their presence, but of their plan, their intentions, their fear. It understood the stakes, the trap, the game being played, and it was willing to counter every move. Lucas whispered, barely audible, "It knows. It understands what we're trying to do." Andrew exhaled slowly, voice tight with resolve. "Then we escalate. We force it to commit, to make a choice we've predicted. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and it's done." The strategy was simple but perilous. Make the shadow believe it had the upper hand, let it overextend into a confined area, and then strike with coordinated force. They baited it, guiding its attention toward a narrow canyon where nets, snares, and weighted traps awaited. The shadow followed, cautious but curious, testing every inch, analyzing every risk. And then it happened. The creature lunged, caught in the first net. It struggled, pulling and twisting, freeing a limb only to become entangled in a second snare. Every movement revealed more of its incredible strength and adaptability, but it had committed to a path Andrew and Lucas had prepared. With synchronized precision, they triggered weighted traps from both sides, designed to force the creature into the final chamber, a confined space where movement was limited. The shadow roared in frustration and pain, its glowing eyes reflecting both fury and calculation. For the first time, it faced a scenario where its raw power was constrained, its intelligence challenged. Andrew and Lucas approached cautiously, knowing this was the moment of truth. They were not facing a mindless predator. They were facing a creature of extraordinary cunning, capable of learning from every interaction. Every nerve in their bodies screamed caution, yet they advanced, using poles and ropes to guide the creature further into the trap. It lunged one final time, a blur of limbs and glowing eyes, but the chamber was designed to limit its mobility. Nets tightened, weighted doors closed, and the shadow was contained, not killed, not subdued completely, but restrained enough for observation and study. Its growls reverberated through the confined space, a testament to its intelligence, adaptability, and unrelenting will to survive. Breathing heavily, Andrew and Lucas stepped back, sweat and grime covering them, hearts racing. They had achieved a small victory: containment, not destruction. They had forced the creature into a scenario where it could be studied, where they could learn, and where they could prepare for the inevitable escalation. Lucas exhaled, voice trembling with relief and awe. "We did it for now." Andrew nodded, eyes fixed on the shadow. "For now. But this isn't the end. It's only a matter of time before it learns from this too. We have to be ready, always ready. Tonight, we survived. Tomorrow, we adapt." When, in that valley, under the watchful eyes of a creature beyond comprehension, they understood the truth that had guided them from the beginning. Survival was no longer about strength alone. It was about intellect, strategy, patience, and the willingness to risk everything to understand a force far greater than themselves. The forest settled into an uneasy silence. The shadow remained contained, glowing eyes never leaving the men. And for the first time, Andrew and Lucas realized that they were no longer merely hunters. They were students of the most dangerous, intelligent force the forest had ever produced. The game had escalated, the stakes higher than ever, and the true battle was only beginning. The valley was silent, but the silence was a lie. Andrew and Lucas could still feel it. The presence of the shadow, restrained but alive, pulsating with raw energy and intelligence. Every subtle twitch, every low growl vibrating through the nets, was a reminder that their victory was temporary. They had contained it, yes, but only through cunning and preparation, not through force. And the creature, far more perceptive than any human, had learned. Lucas knelt beside one of the ropes, inspecting the knots, tightening weak points, muttering to himself as he worked. "It's adapting faster than we can," he said, voice low. "Every move we made tonight, it studied. Every snare, every trap. It knows what's coming next time." Andrew, standing a few feet away, eyes fixed on the glowing orbs that pierced the darkness of the containment chamber, nodded slowly. "We underestimated it before. We can't afford that again. We survived tonight because we were clever, but clever only gets us so far. Tomorrow, we have to be smarter, faster, crueler if necessary." Even as he spoke, a chill crawled up his spine. The creature seemed almost calculating, as if understanding the limits of its captivity. Every muscle coiled like a spring, every movement precise. It wasn't simply a predator, it was a strategist. They spent the remainder of the night in grim vigilance, taking shifts to watch the shadow, noting every pattern, every subtle behavioral shift. And by dawn, a terrifying truth emerged: the creature was planning. By mid-morning, the first signs of its escape attempts appeared. Knots worked loose, ropes stretched, nets fraying at stress points that seemed impossible. The shadow had used its strength in ways that defied logic, twisting and writhing with such precision that it appeared almost premeditated. Andrew and Lucas could see the intelligence in every maneuver. It wasn't panic, it was strategy. Lucas ran his fingers along the rope, tracing the fraying strands. "It's not just trying to get out. It's testing us, seeing what we'll do, measuring how far it can push us before we react. Every second it's contained, it learns." Andrew frowned, heart heavy. "Then we have to take the next step. We can't wait for it to break free on its own. If it escapes unprepared, it will annihilate everything in its path. We need a plan that isn't just containment. It has to be a trap, but on its terms." They spent the next hours preparing a secondary containment, a chamber within a chamber, reinforced with weighted logs, iron chains, and camouflaged pits. But even as they worked, Andrew felt an unsettling awareness. The shadow was watching, not with eyes, perhaps, but with a presence that made every movement of theirs deliberate and measured. It anticipated hesitation, probed for weaknesses, and tested boundaries. As night fell again, Andrew and Lucas baited the shadow with the same calculated mix of scent and sound that had drawn it into the valley before. But this time, the creature didn't rush blindly. It circled the traps, pausing, testing, sniffing, listening, learning. Every second it delayed was a second of learning, and the two men realized with growing dread that the shadow had changed. It wasn't just stronger or faster, it was smarter. Its cunning had evolved to match theirs. Then the attack came. Without warning, the shadow lunged, not at a decoy, but at the edge of the reinforced chamber. The logs splintered, chains groaned, and nets tore. The creature's strength was immense, its precision terrifying. Andrew and Lucas scrambled, triggering hidden reinforcements as best they could, but the shadow was already several steps ahead. It seemed to anticipate every motion, every rope tension, every weighted trap. Lucas shouted over the chaos, "It knows our patterns!" "It's not just fighting, it's calculating." Andrew gritted his teeth. "Then we give it a new pattern. Something it hasn't seen before, force it to make a mistake." They abandoned the previous plan, improvising in real time. Weighted logs swung from trees, pits covered with loose foliage, ropes arranged in angles designed to restrict its movement. But the shadow twisted, leaped, and countered each trap with uncanny foresight. It moved like a shadow itself, twisting and evading, and every strike they attempted only revealed the depth of its intelligence. The valley became a storm of motion, ropes snapping, logs swinging, nets tearing, and the creature roaring in frustration and calculation. Andrew realized with horror that containment was no longer an option. They could delay it, perhaps, but the shadow was testing its limits, and theirs. And then it struck. A sudden, violent surge, a coordinated leap and twist, and the creature broke through the outer reinforcements. Nets shredded, logs flew aside, and the shadow was free, at least partially, constrained only by the inner chamber. But even that limited space allowed it to strike with lethal precision. Andrew and Lucas barely dodged its first assault, rolling into the underbrush as claws and strength collided with reinforced beams. Lucas scrambled to grab a rope, but the shadow was already on him, pinning him against a tree, eyes glowing with intelligence and fury. Andrew lunged with a weighted club, striking the creature on the flank. It twisted, avoiding the blow, and with a terrifying roar flung Lucas aside like a rag doll. Andrew's heart pounded. They had underestimated it, again. The creature's intelligence was evolving faster than they could anticipate, and every engagement only sharpened its cunning. It wasn't simply fighting to escape. It was strategizing, learning, preparing for the next confrontation. Lucas struggled to his feet, face bloodied, eyes wide with adrenaline. It's thinking like us, Andrew. Not like an animal, like us." Andrew nodded grimly, voice tight. "And that's what makes it dangerous. We can't just fight it. We have to outthink it. But every move we make, it's already accounting for it. We're in a race to see who adapts faster." The shadow roared, lunging toward them with feral precision. They scattered, improvising, using the terrain to their advantage. Every step, every reaction was calculated. The creature anticipated patterns, exploited hesitation, and adapted instantly. It was no longer a beast. They were facing an entity of extraordinary intelligence, capable of learning in real time, capable of predicting human strategy and countering it with precision that defied comprehension. Hours passed in chaos, a relentless dance of survival and intellect. Every moment was a battle of wit, endurance, and nerve. Andrew and Lucas realized they could not win through brute force. They had to create a scenario where the shadow's intelligence worked against itself. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, they found a temporary advantage. Using a combination of misdirection and environmental manipulation, they funneled the creature into a narrow canyon where its mobility was restricted. Weighted traps dropped, ropes tightened, and the shadow roared in frustration, thrashing with immense strength but limited by the terrain. Breathing heavily, Andrew and Lucas surveyed the scene. They had contained it, again, but barely. Their bodies were battered, their nerves frayed, and they understood with chilling clarity that this was only the beginning. The shadow had learned, adapted, and grown more dangerous with every encounter. Lucas muttered, voice trembling, "We've bought time, nothing more." "It's learning, Andrew. Every second we delay, It becomes smarter, faster, deadlier. Andrew nodded, eyes fixed on the glowing form in the canyon. And we'll adapt. We have to. There's no other choice. Tonight, we survived. Tomorrow we fight smarter, harder, or we die. The shadow's growl echoed through the canyon, a reminder of its relentless intelligence and cunning. The battle was far from over, and both men understood that survival would demand not only courage, but a willingness to evolve faster than a creature that seemed almost beyond comprehension. In the dark valley, two men and a force of nature, sized intelligence prepared for the next confrontation, knowing that the real test, the true measure of strategy, intellect, and endurance, was still to come. And in the eyes of the shadow, a terrifying awareness burned. It had learned, it had adapted, and it would not forget. Dawn broke over the valley with a deceptive calm. Mist hung low over the ground, curling through the trees like smoke, softening the jagged edges of the rocky terrain. Andrew and Lucas crouched behind a boulder, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the shadow trapped in the canyon below. It was quiet now, but that stillness was deceptive. Both men knew better than to trust a creature that had turned intelligence into weaponry. Every second it had been contained. It had been studying, calculating, preparing. The shadow's chest heaved as it lay in the canyon, its glowing eyes surveying the terrain, noting every rock, every crevice, every weakness in the containment. It wasn't simply waiting. It was planning its next move, and its patience was frighteningly infinite. Andrew broke the silence first, voice low. We can't hold it here forever. We need a final solution, and it has to be clever. Not just brute strength. Clever, precise, in a way it won't anticipate. Lucas nodded, fingers tracing the knots of the ropes they had laid. I know. We can't just restrain it anymore. Every trap we've used has taught it our limits. We need something different, something that turns its intelligence against it. They spent hours preparing, using the natural landscape as a weapon. Narrow cliffs, hidden pits, weighted boulders balanced precariously over strategic points, all designed to funnel the shadow into a trap where its strength could become a disadvantage. They improvised tirelessly, working in silence, hearts pounding, aware that one misstep could mean death. As the afternoon sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the canyon, they were ready. Andrew and Lucas retreated to a concealed vantage point, ropes and pulleys in place, boulders teetering, all set to collapse in a chain reaction triggered by a single calculated signal. The shadow sensed them immediately, its glowing eyes narrowing. It moved, slow at first, almost measured, as if calculating the best angle of attack. Its intelligence was terrifying, anticipating, analyzing, preparing. But Andrew had counted on that. Every movement it made had been considered, predicted, incorporated into their design. With a sudden surge, the shadow lunged forward, testing the narrow canyon. The boulders creaked, ropes stretched, and with a precise combination of force and weight, the first trap was triggered. Rocks fell, narrowly missing the creature, but forcing it deeper into the canyon. Another trap snapped, a weighted log swinging down, and the shadow twisted, avoiding, but its path was now constrained, its options limited. Andrew whispered to Lucas, voice taut with tension, "Now, the next part has to work perfectly." They triggered the final mechanism, a hidden pit with reinforced spikes, camouflaged with leaves and branches. The shadow, forced into a straight path, saw only a narrow escape route and lunged right into the trap. There was a horrifying sound as the creature hit the concealed spikes. It struggled, twisting, attempting to free itself, but the cleverness of the design worked perfectly. The traps closed around it, chains tightening, rocks pinning, every movement countered by human ingenuity. For a moment there was silence. Then, a low, guttural growl echoed through the canyon. The shadow was trapped, not just restrained, but immobilized. It glared at them with eyes that burned with anger, intelligence, and understanding. It had been outmaneuvered, not through strength, but through strategy. Andrew approached cautiously, adrenaline still pumping. It's contained," he said, barely believing the words. Lucas joined him, both men wary, aware that one mistake could undo everything. The shadow shifted slightly, glowing eyes watching them, every muscle coiled, every nerve tense. but it made no further attempt to escape. For now, at least, the danger was contained. Andrew exhaled a long, trembling breath. We did it. We actually did it. Lucas nodded, voice tight with relief. We survived. And it's alive. Somehow, it's still alive. That's incredible. But even as they stood there, victorious, a gnawing realization settled in their minds. The shadow had been forced into this state, not destroyed. It had learned, adapted, and its intelligence had only grown sharper with each confrontation. Containment was temporary. The true challenge lay in understanding it, predicting its next move, and preparing for the inevitable. Hours passed as they reinforced the traps, ensuring that every angle was secure. They worked silently, knowing that any sound might trigger the creature's instincts. By nightfall, they had constructed a containment strong enough to withstand almost anything the shadow could attempt in its current state. Finally, exhausted and bleeding from minor injuries sustained during the day, they sat on the canyon's edge, watching the creature. Its glowing eyes reflected the moonlight, mesmerizing and terrifying. It shifted slightly, a reminder that it was alive, aware and waiting. Andrew broke the silence, voice soft but firm. We've won today. But this isn't over. We have to study it, understand it. If we leave it here, it will adapt, grow smarter, and the next time, we might not survive. Lucas nodded, eyes never leaving the creature. We've seen what it can do. Every move we make, it learns. If we want to survive, if we want to protect anyone else, we have to understand it. And we have to prepare for a lifetime of vigilance. The shadow growled low, a sound that reverberated through the canyon, echoing like a living thing. Its presence was overwhelming, an intelligence far beyond anything they had ever encountered. Yet, in that growl, there was also an acknowledgement, a recognition of the struggle, a respect for the strategy that had bested brute strength with ingenuity. Andrew turned to Lucas, voice resolute. We've been given a chance. We survived, and it's alive. Now we learn. Now we prepare. The valley may be quiet tonight, but tomorrow is when we continue the war. Lucas exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what they had endured, what they had learned. We adapt, he said. We survive. And maybe, just maybe, we finally understand what we're dealing with. The shadow shifted again, eyes glowing brighter in the moonlight. It was contained, but not broken. Its presence was a constant reminder of the fine line between triumph and annihilation. Andrew and Lucas knew that their victory was only temporary. That intelligence was a force that could never truly be restrained. As the night deepened, the valley fell into an uneasy silence. The shadow remained, a living enigma of power and cunning. Andrew and Lucas, battered but alive, watched over it, knowing that the battle had changed them forever. The creature's strength, its intelligence, its relentless adaptability, they had survived, but only because they had matched it with strategy, courage, and unrelenting focus. The dawn of a new day promised nothing but challenge. The shadow's presence was a permanent reminder that survival was not about strength alone, but about wit, foresight, and the ability to adapt faster than the forces that threatened them. And in that knowledge, Andrew and Lucas found both fear and determination. They would endure. They would learn, and when the shadow struck again, and it inevitably would, they would be ready. The valley remained silent, the moon retreating behind clouds, the shadow watching with eyes that burned like twin beacons. The war was far from over, but Andrew and Lucas had survived part one of a battle that would define not only their lives, but the very nature of intelligence, cunning, and survival itself. And in the quiet darkness, a single thought persisted for both men. The shadow had been outmaneuvered for now,